I will wait just for the YouTube to start, and we start. Good. So now we are online, and welcome everyone to this last final class. And I hope it's not the last class we ever have together. Perhaps we can organize the similar occasions again in the future if you are interested. And certainly I will be offering more courses like that online. I'm planning at least. So welcome if you want to come back someday. Today we have ambitious goal. We have to finish with the iconography of Christ and real quick go through several types of iconography of Mary, which will be the end of our formal class. And then the second half for today, I will be presenting about practical icon painting. I'm not myself an iconographer. I tried a couple of times, but I never dedicated really time to this, but I have observed a lot how other people do it, and this presentation I'm going to show today is basically was made by some colleagues of mine who actually teach iconography, so I will be just voicing it, presenting it to you. And I will be trying to show first how the traditional icon is made. Generally speaking, for some of you, this will be familiar because I know that some of you are well experienced icon painters, and some of you tried this art for a short time, and for some of you this probably will be new. And secondly, I will show how we work, how we approach this process of learning and teaching iconography. I think it will be somehow different from what you are used to. And every school has its own ways of teaching it. So I'm hoping to show you something new today, also in that second half. Now I'm sharing my screen, and we start with the final presentation on the types of iconography. So last time we went through the most common and important types of the iconography of Christ, being the Holy Face and the Pantocrator. And the Pantocrator icon, just excuse me please, I need to close the door because there will be noise. So the Holy Face and the Pantocrator, and today we are turning to the next two important types of presentation of Jesus. I've briefly shown the last time the Emmanuel, the child Christ, and the Christ in glory or in heavenly powers. Regarding the first type, we have said already that it developed historically, artistically speaking, on the basis of the iconography of the so-called Roman type, which is characterized by the absence of the beard. Usually it's a youthful, young-looking representation of Jesus with short hair, and naturally it was adapted for the iconography of Christ as a child, as a baby, or as a young man. And in those early examples, we can see this kind of early stage of the development of this iconography. Here, Jesus is represented as, we wouldn't recognize this as Jesus, right? It's very unconventional representation of Jesus, but in fact, it is him with the sign of the cross and being carried by the angels in this round imago clipeata kind of imperial royal image and blessing. So all the attributes here coincide with the normal iconography of Jesus except his face. And here is another example later, but from if I'm not mistaken, from 8th century manuscript, Jesus is represented here again as the emperor over the head of the Byzantine emperor in this imperial round shield image, but as a young man, although with longer hair, not with short Roman hair like in this case. Here are a couple more examples how the iconography of Jesus, the Emmanuel, young Jesus, can be used. Here it is the vision of Daniel, or vision of Ezekiel, Old Testament prophet, and hence the Ezekiel is represented here, and Isaiah, another seer of God in the Old Testament, here. Both prophets are remarkable for the fact that they have seen God enthroned in heaven in very different visions. For Isaiah, Luke chapter 6, the description of God on the heavenly throne and the angelic host singing, holy, 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 Lord of power and might. So the hymn that we sing in the center of the divine liturgy, of the Eucharistic liturgy. And Ezekiel saw God on the throne that was kind of moving on the wheels. So the chariot throne, a quite common motive in the Bible, surrounded by 4 heavenly creatures, apocalyptic creatures. Sometimes they are referred to as apocalyptic or heavenly creatures, angelic creatures, but in the New Testament they came to symbolize the 4 Gospels, something we have seen a number of times in this course. But most interestingly, what Ezekiel saw in the center of that moving chariot throne was the figure of someone like the Son of Man, or the likeness of the Son of Man. So a human shape, a human figure, which was not clearly distinguishable, but it was clearly human. And it was taken by the fathers of the church as a kind of prophecy for the incarnation of Christ. So this descending of the divine throne chariot on earth and presence among human beings, and God represented human form, taken as a prophetic foretelling of incarnation of the Son of God. And therefore, in Christian iconography, Jesus is represented exactly as a young boy, in this case, who comes from heaven. He has this, again, heavenly throne, heavenly halo surrounding him, and the scroll in his hand, symbolizing that he is a messenger and the message of the Father. He is the Word of God himself who came down to human beings. As such, he is also represented in the scenes of finding Jesus in the temple. So an episode from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus was lost when he was 12 years old, and then recovered in the temple, sitting among the Pharisees and scribes and discussing with them something about the Word of God. And in this scene, again, the 12-year-old Jesus is naturally represented as Emmanuel, as beardless young boy with the cross halo, and in this case holding a book, although he can be also holding a scroll, as in other types of the Emmanuel iconography. Here we see it's a fresco, a 4th century fresco from the catacombs, from the Roman catacombs. Again, a young Jesus sitting on the cosmic sphere, surrounded by the apostles. And here again, the vision of Ezekiel, who sees Jesus as a young boy enthroned in the similar composition like this one. Classically, the Emmanuel looks like this. Usually it's something like, I don't know, like 2-3-year-old boy, usually held by Mary or sometimes independently, like in this icon. And as I said already, it's a reference, the name itself, Emmanuel, means God with us, and it's a reference to the prophecy of Isaiah 7:14, that virgin will conceive and give birth to a child, and his name will be called Emmanuel. And this prophecy is reused, quoted in the first chapter of Matthew in the Nativity story. So it becomes a very important prophetic text for Christian understanding of the incarnation. As every other type of representation, Emmanuel has certain theological significance, and this significance is the incarnation of the eternal Son of God, that the Logos, the one who through whom all things were made, through whom the world was created, becomes human in Jesus, but he is human, and at the same time he is the carrier of absolute wisdom. That's why he could, being a 12-year-old boy, he could impress the elders in the temple with his wisdom. And that's why in the icon he is represented as with an adult face and with a naturally large forehead, which is kind of anthropological symbol of wisdom and learning and depth of a person. Sometimes this head can be almost almost distorted. It's a little bit too much. Depends on the painter. Like in this case, I think it's a little bit too disproportionate. But you get the idea what the painter wanted to convey. Like in this case, it's much more harmonious, but still the large forehead, the high forehead, and this kind of absence of hair, like bald. Like in iconography, they would paint men who are wise, learned, and becoming bold because they are getting to the maturity age. So here is represented almost like that. And also his clothes is always usually in light colors, so white, gold, mixture of white and gold, sometimes purple can be too. Purple as a royal color. Historically speaking, this iconography, this emphasis on the eternal wisdom of the Word of God dwelling in this young boy, young child, is the emphasis to one of the early Christian heresies called Nestorianism, that denied that Jesus was divine Son, and this heresy viewed Jesus as simply a human baby, a human child that eventually grew up, and only when he was 30 years old, at the event of his baptism, he was joined to the divine spirit and became Messiah. So Nestorians would emphasize, Nestorians broadly speaking, it's a group that had different views, but broadly speaking, they would emphasize that they would represent, they would interpret the event of baptism of Jesus in Jordan as a moment when the Spirit of God descended on a human person and transformed this human person into divinely ordained Son of God. So they would not look at the young Jesus as incarnation of divinity. And to oppose this heresy, early Christian theologians wrote many treatises and so on, but also they kind of purposefully designed Christian iconography in a way to emphasize this permanent presence of divinity in Jesus, even at his birth, at his conception, as a matter of fact, as we will see later, at his birth, in his early years, and so on. So it's this emphasis on the presence of the divine logos in Jesus from the moment of his conception. Again, as we can see on this fragment of Mary from the Annunciation icon, so the angel would stand here on her left, and Jesus as Emmanuel, as a tiny child, is represented here to symbolize the moment of conception. So that's kind of symbolic representation of a child to be present in the womb of Mary, starting with this moment of her agreeing to accept the will of God and to become the mother of God. Again, another Byzantine icon representing Jesus in the temple, where you can see he's represented in this golden purple mixture of purple and gold garments, holding the scroll with the halo and speaking to the elders as someone authoritative, someone who is actually teaching them and is not taught by them. Okay, second and final for today type of the iconography of Christ, Christ in glory. And this is an eschatological image of Christ in eternity, Christ, so to speak, after incarnation. If Emmanuel is emphasizing the eternal divinity of the Son of God before incarnation and in the incarnation as a divine child, and the Pantocrator represents Jesus in his historical concreteness, the Christ in glory represents Jesus who is already ascended to heaven after his resurrection and kind of sits at the right hand of the Father, except the Father is never represented in iconography, as we have already discussed, and it's only Son who is visible to human beings, and he is represented as Christ on the heavenly throne, in the heavenly glory, and Christ of the second coming. So he is often placed in the center of this kind of last judgment representations, Jesus who is coming to judge. Here are a couple of examples of this iconography in its mature stage, when it was finally formed in late Byzantine period. And you can recognize Jesus practically identical with the Pantocrator, because he is represented in his kind of portraitic appearance, identifiable as Jesus, with the cross halo, with the inscriptions on the cross halo, with blessing gesture, always open book, almost never closed, because this is the judgment moment, so the book is open. And so everything is like from Pantocrator, except that he is seated not on a human throne, not standing just like that, not half-figured, but he is full-figured and seated on the fiery heavenly throne that is full of angelic presences, of angelic beings who are depicted in the faces. If you can see small faces and wings everywhere here, in red and in blue. All this space is filled with angels drawn just in white pigment against the background of this fiery red rhomb square and the oval of the dark one. The symbolism of the fire and darkness is also very biblical, very profound, because God is often described, a number of times is described in the Bible as fire, devouring fire, or God dwelling in inapproachable light. So this idea of dazzling light or fire that burns everyone who dares to stare at it or approach it is very strong. It conveys the idea of God who is radically transcendent, radically ungraspable by human beings. At the same time, the dark circle full with angels, like you can see here, also represents this idea of divine darkness. And darkness here doesn't mean like evil, something like darkness in the underworld, in hell, but darkness means the inability to comprehend. Darkness as mystery, covered in darkness, covered in mystery. So God, although he is fire, he is light, but he is disguised, what's the word, like covered, hidden from us by the curtain of mystery. It's not easy to approach God. It's not easy to see him. And this symbolism has to do with the story of Moses coming up on the Mount Sinai, that he climbed the mountain, and at the top of it, he hit the cloud that was very thick and dark, and God was in that cloud. And there are many commentaries by the fathers of the church who developed this idea that God dwells in this darkness, and the closer you approach God, the deeper you dive into that dark cloud. That means the closer to God you are, the more you know that you know nothing, that you cannot comprehend God, you cannot grasp God. And as the rays from this divine darkness, there are these four sharp rays representing the symbols of the Evangelists. Again, Matthew as angel, John as eagle, Mark as lion, and Luke as an ox or bull. And so God is kind of in mystery, but he gives us revelation. So this revelation comes as rays out of darkness, enlightening the world. And it's an often mentioned image in the Christian liturgy that the four Gospels are like the four rivers that flew out of Eden in the Genesis story, or like four powerful rays of light that cut the darkness of the world with the revelation of divine mysteries. So it's, and of course, the image of the gospel book in Jesus' hands reinforces this idea. The inscriptions in the book can be different, but usually they have something to do with the judgment, because the whole theological underlying idea of this image is the divine judgment, the second coming. And that's why Jesus in the center is often placed in the traditional pattern of the so-called deities, or what's the word for that? The ardent prayer on the part of Mary and intercession, Mary and John the Baptist. And then there can be more figures on both sides: apostles, angels, holy hierarchs, bishops, and so on. Theological significance of this, as I said, it's eschatological Christ that comes again to judge the living and the dead. So it's often placed also in the Last Judgment composition. And it's so the logic of Byzantine liturgy is not linear. It kind of this deicist composition is usually placed on the iconostasis over the royal doors. And when priests prays the prayer of sanctification over the gifts of the Eucharist, he says that commemorating Jesus' incarnation, Jesus' suffering and crucifixion, Jesus' death, resurrection, ascension, and his second coming, we offer his gifts for all. And so commemorating the second coming, it sounds a little bit strange because we can commemorate events that happened already historically, but how can we commemorate something that is only expected to happen? And that means that liturgy doesn't live by linear time. It lives already kind of in eternity, and it enumerating the key stages of salvation history. Liturgy commemorates things that already happened on human timeline and those that still have to happen as if they were one. And the same logic goes for the iconostasis and for the presence of this icon on the upper tier of the iconostasis. Because in the lower tier, we have icon of Pantocrator and of Mother of God, like this, on two sides of the royal door, and they symbolize the actual historical incarnation of Jesus, his life on earth. And then in the upper tier, there is this image of the second coming that is already anticipated in the liturgy. So it's the best I can explain about that. Now, regarding the iconography of the Mother of God, we are going to start to focus on two representations that are most common, Hodegetria and Eleusa. Don't be scared by these Greek names. I will explain what they mean. So the Hodegetria iconography, or basically any iconography of Mary, developed from the nativity representations, like those seen in Santa Maria Maggiore. We have seen them as mosaics, but here I prefer to show them in this kind of drawing representation. Mary is sitting here on the throne, and here she poses as the Queen Mother with the child, representing the child to people who gathered to greet the child at birth, and welcoming people who are coming to greet the baby. So there is this double movement on the part of Mary. She is offering the child, representing the child to the crowd, to like shepherds and three kings and people who gathered at Bethlehem, symbolically here. And so she's giving the child and pointing towards the child, and at the same time she's welcoming those who want to bring gifts to the child or pay homage to the child. So mark this two-way movement, because it will be visible on all later Marian icons of Hodegetria. This early Sinai icon that is, by the way, it's now in Ukraine, because it was taken in the end of 19th century by a bishop who was in Kiev, but he was visiting Sinai often, and he was one of the guys who were kind of smuggling manuscripts and icons out of Sinai into the then Russian Empire. And 4 of the Sinai icons ended up in Kiev in a national museum. one of the central museums. And here we see basically kind of part of the nativity story. It looks like self-sufficient icon of Mary with the child, but if you pay attention to Jesus' look, he's gazing clearly not at us, but at somebody who is here, and his hand is stretched with a palm open, like welcoming and receiving a gift from a person who is here. And Mary is also kind of looking into this direction. So the icon is clearly made with the view of people who are here, and those probably are the three kings, the three wise men who brought the gifts. And Mary is kind of holding the child in a tight embrace in this case. She's not offering the child, but simply embracing him. Here is another icon, which is also early from the 6th century and is preserved in Rome. And here Mary has this eloquent gesture pointing at Jesus, and Jesus is turned towards Mary and blessing her. So there are different representations at earlier stage of the development of this iconography, like this or many others. But then at some point, those icons come to this kind of canonical, strict representation with Mary and the child sitting upright, turned towards us. So Jesus is facing and looking straight, and Mary too. Jesus still has this blessing gesture that is turned partially towards Mary, but probably more towards us. He's holding the scroll, unlike in the earlier presentations. And Mary is clearly pointing towards Jesus. And this gesture of Mary pointing towards Jesus is that gave the name to the icon, the one showing the way. Hodigitria, hodos is a way, and hodigitria means a woman, because it's a feminine noun, a woman showing the way, or the woman leading the way. And the logic of this is that Mary is pointing to Jesus as the way of life, as the central person in the salvation history, much as she was doing here. She was clearly coming out of the royal chamber as a queen, empress mother, coming out of the royal chamber to represent the new king, the new emperor to the public, and pointed her hand towards him. Jesus is dressed, as we said before, in this purple, heavily gilded dress, holding the scroll. Here the halo is destroyed, but it's there, and it has the usual cross shape. And Mary has these 3 stars on the mantle. That again is a usual attribute of the representation of Mary in this type of hodigitria. This icon is believed to be like one of the exemplary Byzantine, like most canonical, most conservative representations of hodigitria, but there are many, and this is the most popular iconography type of Mary. And if you want to unmistakably identify hodigitria, there are 2 things. They sit apart from each other, so the embraces are not tight. They are not like leaning towards each other, but Mary is like a throne. She's holding Jesus, and pointing towards him. So the pointing gesture and the two separate silhouettes are the important traits of this iconography. Here is just a modern rendering of the same type. Straight positions, separated, Jesus with the scroll, golden, halos, and Mary pointing towards Jesus again. So the dogmatic theological meaning of this composition is the incarnation of the Son of God and him being the way of life for the believers. So we have to follow Jesus. Mary is not drawing attention to herself. It has also this kind of spiritual twist that we identify those icons as Marian icons. Because Mary is larger, Mary is featured in those icons, but as a matter of fact, they are not Marian icons. They are, theologically speaking, they are icons of the incarnate Son of God. And Mary is a humble servant of God who is serving the mystery of incarnation and is not circling the attention on herself. The other iconography is the so-called eleusa, and eleusa comes from a Greek root that means mercy or love. Mercy, pity, love, like that. So it can be rendered freely like loving embrace, tenderness, and so on. And the idea of this icon is, the layout of this icon, again, allowing to unmistakably identify this as eleusa, is that baby is touching the cheek of her mother, of his mother. The embrace is very tight, it's cheek to cheek, and the son is actually not even leaning, but kind of like rushing towards mother, which is especially visible here in this beautiful icon, that this baby is like in a jump movement to lean to the mother. And this embrace and this cheek-to-cheek position has nothing to do with this kind of modern, sweet, and sweet idea about, kissing and playing, cherishing the child. It's actually just the opposite. This iconography is also called the Passion, or the Passion Mother of God, the Passion representation, Passion referring to the passions of Christ, not passion like love, but the suffering of the cross, because this embrace on the part of God, this active embracing of the human being, is interpreted as eagerness of God to become human in order to save humanity. God wants to be joined to human nature. He wants to become human, and the humanity is symbolized by Mary, and God is obviously represented by the child Jesus. And this cheek-to-cheek contact is symbolizing the depth of the unity. God becomes human. He becomes one of us. He is joined to our nature completely, and he is joined not in order to live a happy life, not in order to play with the mother, to be enjoying positive human emotions, but ultimately to be killed, to make the sacrifice. And Mary is represented here not just as a type of the human race, but also as an exemplary human being, exemplary mother, because she is not holding the child to herself, but she is ready to sacrifice the child. She receives the child as the gift from God, but at the same time, this looking at us, this gaze of Mary is full of sacrificial willingness to give up the child for the life of the world. That's why these icons sometimes have angels with cross and the spear and sponge and crown of thorns and so on, representing the expected, anticipated death of Jesus on the cross. Just another example of this iconography, maybe the most minimalistic one. And often you see them in such a form. It's one of the later Byzantine, and it's very popular in the modern Greek iconography, layout of Mary with the child. And there are many icons with this kind of bent neck and the embrace in this form, rather than like this that was common for earlier Byzantine iconography. Okay, so that's done, and if you have any questions regarding this, I can answer them, and if not, we can turn to the second part. Was God changing over time while Jesus on earth discuss? Did his time on earth affect him? The question is whether God was changing over time while on earth. That's a good question. Jesus was certainly growing up to his divinity. It's said that in the Gospel of Luke that Jesus returned to Nazareth and was growing in wisdom, physically and in wisdom, in obedience to his parents. But God himself doesn't change. God cannot grow. God doesn't have time. So when God was incarnate, I don't think God changed. Just human nature of Jesus was growing and developing to embrace the fullness of his divinity. That's probably what I can say. Yeah, the other name for those icons is Tender Mary, Tender Mother of God. Sometimes it's referred to like that, yes. Okay. If no questions, then I'm sharing another presentation. Just give me a second. Oh, where it is. Yeah. Okay, so this will be about traditional icon painting techniques and style. Just using the example that is obviously well known and close to me of our school. It's called Radruj. It's a funny name. I will explain you why. and the school is at the Ukrainian Catholic University here in Lviv in Ukraine. It exists since 2006, so we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year. And so Radrusz is a village in the present-day Poland, just on the border with Ukraine, but on that side of on the Polish side of the border. But it's an ethnic Ukrainian village in which this beautiful wooden church is preserved. And the church used to be a home to the oldest preserved icons, Western Ukrainian icons that survived up to date. You can see just two examples. There are more. I just chose this baptism of Jesus and the Pentecost icons. There are a couple more. We will see them later, and they come from the end of 14th, the beginning of 15th century, and are the oldest, the earliest icons that survived, at least in Lviv. We don't have anything earlier in Ukraine, unfortunately. Everything in the eastern, central Ukraine was either taken to Moscow after the Mongols devastated Ukraine in the 13th century, or burned down by the Tartars, Mongols in that time. And Western Ukraine was mostly untouched by the Mongol invasion, and that's why those icons survived and made it all the way till now. We named the school Radrusz just to emphasize this kind of historical link of what we are doing to this oldest layers of traditional Ukrainian iconography. What we are doing is painting icons in natural pigments using the traditional egg tempera technique, and trying to study icons more or less seriously from historical, artistic, and theological perspective. So we have like 3 pillars on which the school stands. So we are trying to learn the authentic, traditional, medieval technique of iconography and technique and style based on what we call close study of the original old icons and their imitation. I will explain what we mean by these 2 key concepts, what we mean by close study and what we mean by imitation, because imitation is a misleading word, but it's very important for our learning. Secondly, we really pay attention to learning theology, art history, and art theory. Many iconography schools that exist in the Orthodox world, in Russia, in Greece, somehow in Ukraine, but also in the West, they are focused exclusively on learning technical, artistic side, and almost completely neglecting the theological and art historical dimension of icons. We are trying to keep balance, so our students learn practical iconography, obviously, but not without understanding the philosophy behind icons, theology and history and so on. And third, very important, and I think pretty original for us, is that we learn by immersion. Immersion in the liturgy. We are trying to offer to our students intensive liturgical and spiritual care program. So retreat, different sermons, services by priests, and participation in liturgical services, and study tours to museums and old churches in Ukraine and abroad whenever we can afford it. So going to museums, seeing original ancient icons, going to churches for which those icons were painted and in which they were placed, looking at wall paintings and so on, is an essential part of this learning by immersion. Mission of the school is to revive the authentic Ukrainian and broadly Eastern Christian iconographic tradition and develop it in the modern world. So we are focusing on revival of the tradition, but we don't stop there. We are open to creating something new in the modern world based on dialogue with other traditions and cultures, based on solid theological, historical, and artistic foundations. And I will see you some examples how we hope we are achieving this. So we are not only learning Ukrainian iconography, but we are open to Byzantine, Greek iconography, and other other iconographic traditions or just general artistic traditions of the West. We tried to cooperate with a number of Western partners and created something that clearly goes beyond the scope of Byzantine tradition, but meets the West somehow. By the way, this is a good example of the diocesan composition, the extended one. So Jesus in the center, not as Christ in glory, but as Christ Pantocrator, Mary and John the Baptist, and then angels, apostles, and holy bishops, Basil and John, as the authors of the text of liturgies. Important Christian theologians and liturgical composers. Why do we study Ukrainian icons of particularly 15th, 16th centuries? Because these are the earliest examples of Ukrainian iconography that survive, and they are important because they still keep continuity with the Byzantine tradition. They are Byzantine icons in the full sense of that word, but also they already have very clear, distinct local flavor, certain kind of proto-national iconographic identity. So they are both clearly Byzantine and clearly Ukrainian, which is important to us, obviously being in Ukraine, but not exclusively. We are studying Serbian, Romanian, Greek, Russian iconography. It's not to say that we are just focused on Ukrainian, but naturally Ukrainian is important, especially given the fact that in the same city of Lviv, we have this great national museum that has a large collection of authentic old icons, something over 3,000 pieces, and they're accessible in the open exhibit for viewing, but also they are accessible for closer study upon request. So it's a very important kind of lab for us to go to the museum and to see the icons, especially when they are in the hands of restorers, because the restorers actually take away the dirt, the upper layers of paint, and they let you see the anatomy of the icon. It's like for the medical students to see people operate under the surgery or like corpses cut. It's important to know how it is made. So our students take advantage of that, and I think it's a great opportunity. So what we do while learning, what the learning process includes, it's the close study of the originals, looking at the originals live, looking at them under microscope, under different tools the restorers and the researchers of icons use, and also using the small microscopic pictures of small fragments of icons that allow you to see really in good detail how the icon is made. So we study the painting, we study materials, chemistry of the icon, technology, how different pigments were applied, how gilding is made, and so on. We study carving, because sometimes, as you can see here, the halos or backgrounds of the icons can be carved in different techniques. And stylistic features of icons, specific use of pigments, and all that. So sometimes our students really study like chemistry to know what the icons are made of, and sometimes they study more as artists, just drawing inspiration from the old prototypes. This is just an example of one of ancient icons. So you all know that icon starts with the wooden shield, with the wooden board, and it's important to use the good, proper wood for that. This drawing is just showing what pieces of wood were traditionally chosen for the boards. And the board usually has on the back this horizontal planks. I don't know what you call them in English, because they hold together parts of the icon shield and let it bend a little bit, so wood absorbs humidity, and based on that it always moves. So the icon has to be made in such a way that it allows for microscopic movements of wood without cracking the grounding layer of the icon. And that's how this is ensured. Here are the layers of the icon. So the wooden base, then glue. We usually use animal glue. Some people I know don't like this because it's a rabbit skin glue. It's actually from a boiled rabbit skin, but that's what was used traditionally. Then usually, or sometimes, not usually, but I would say 50% of time, upon the glue, a linen cloth, a thin linen cloth can be applied as a basis for the painting, and on the top of this linen cloth, gesso ground. Sometimes there is a cloth on the top of gesso grounding. It's a technological issue. I'm not going to go into that. Then thin layer of paint just to cover the gesso and its possible uneven elements with some paint, and then many layers of paint. Sometimes it's like 5-7 layers. Not in all sections of icons, but in some most important ones. And then the protective layer of varnish coming on the top just to protect the icon from dust, damages, and so on. Some icon boards have this so-called kovcheg, this deepened, the margins that are slightly higher than the surface of the icon. That's a traditional thing. Sometimes on these margins they have special scenes depicted or medallions with like faces of apostles and so on, but usually they have just decorative function. So we learn technology based on restoration materials. This is very, very important, because what happens if you try to imitate an old icon from an icon book is that you are seeing only the surface of the icon. And it's impossible or very difficult to create the icon based on the surface picture, which you are seeing in the book. The icon is created kind of inside out. you have to start with the lower layers, and then if you apply layer by layer the proper paint in proper proportion, in proper technique, on the surface you will come up with the image that is ideally as close as possible to the original. If you are simply trying to imitate the surface right away, you will probably come with a rather weak copy of what you are seeing on the picture. Even if you have very good quality picture, it's not possible. So the restoration materials let you know what was underneath, layer by layer, and all the details of that. And I will show in a second, I think, some quite impressive examples of that. So we're trying to look at all the details, for example, like this cloth here. If you just look at this, you cannot really imitate it. But if you have it's not microscopic, but good scale picture of this detail, then you see the strokes of brush in every case, and you can do it really well. So you can clean up the colors. All the icons are usually quite dark, but this darkness is due to three things. There is just dirt and dust. There is darkening of the varnish. Varnish gets dark with time and it gets kind of brown. And we think that icons were dark, but they were not dark in the original. They just get dark with time. And third factor that contributes to darkening is that some pigments with the time, especially if they are mixed with other pigments that are underneath, they react, they create a chemical reaction that can result either in darkening or in a radical change of color. Sometimes icons which we see today as green or blue could have been in original quite different, not so bright green or bright blue, but they became so as a result of chemical reactions over centuries. So true color, removing dirt, removing darkened varnish, and so on helps to know how icon looked at the beginning. Also, we can analyze painting layers, sometimes based on really scientific photographs. I'm going to show you in a second just an example of that. Yeah, it's here. So we see this is the Holy Face icon, also from Radrush. This is general view, but then we have parts of it photographed, like the face, the left side of the face, and that allows you already to see these strokes very well, and all the so-called the modeling of the face, the play of dark shades and light. And it's zoomable, so you can actually zoom in and see it in really good resolution, good detail, and then repeat the painting with maximal precision. Here is the picture of just the eye, one of the eyes. And I have always been amazed by this geometry. It's so cool. It's very neat, but also very free. It's not like frozen, not like made with circle, but it's like a drop of water I find it very beautiful. I don't know. I think there is a question here in the chat. I don't see it. Okay, later. Yeah, and also we use some microscopic pictures. This is like 2.5 millimeters photographed under microscope. That allows you to see the pigment and the dispersion of the pigment. For example, Virginia, I'm seeing your hand. I will let you speak in a second. So the ochre pigment that is kind of ground brown, and then the greenish malachite pigment mixed with white. That's something that gives this kind of smooth look to the color of the icon, but you can establish what's going on only if you see it in great detail, like this, or, well, this is just the lighting of the hand. Okay, I want to let people speak. I'm seeing the questions. I'll stop the share for a second and see the chat. You're saying you cannot see any of the pictures? Huh. I don't know why, because I actually shared them. So sorry. So sorry. Let me try again. That's too bad. I allow you to unmute yourself, okay? But please don't unmute unless you're speaking, because then it's interfering with the sound and with the video. I know what happened. I'll just re-show that. Sorry. Because I need to share.
We couldn't unmute ourselves. Now it finally opened up. Sorry.
I allowed you. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
We just couldn't see what you were showing. We were all trying to get your attention.
I'm sorry, because when I have the screen share, I also for some reason cannot see what you're writing in the chat here. Okay, are you seeing it now?
Yes, we can see it now.
You are. Okay, so that's the general view of the icon. And then there is like image, sharp image showing a part of face that allows you to see the style of painting. It doesn't help you to understand the chemistry of the painting, what pigments were used and how they were used, so on. But at least the painting style, the strokes and everything is pretty well visible. Still more detailed image like the eye here. Yeah. Which allows you to really learn well how the old painters worked with their lines and with their geometric forms. And this eye looks very simple, but it's actually a very hard thing to do if you want to paint it, because it was usually painted by a very experienced iconographer that just with few touches, with a fast movement. And this fast movement resulted in this natural kind of like water drop-like shape. That is, if you are repeating it like millimeter by millimeter slowly, it's gonna look ugly. It has to be done like signature, like. So it's a good good thing to learn. The next one. That's a really microscopic one. I think it's made through the microscope with a special photography technology, and it's like 2 square millimeters of the surface of the icon that shows the dispersion, the chemistry of the painting. So the dispersion of certain elements, certain pigments, based on the ochre brown ground pigment, and then mixed with the malachite, the green ones, and the white, which results in the end in this kind of effect like this, where you have shading with brown, but it's lightened up with the white pigment and made look greenish with the malachite. So to come up with the image that will look eventually on the surface, that's just more of the same. With the image that will look eventually like this, you have to move from this microscopic layers of pigments into the general picture. And that's the trick in learning something like that. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do we have any idea how long it takes someone to learn this process? And was there some sort of an apprenticeship system where?
Historically, it's very hard to say because we don't have any records of that. But usually in old times, people were doing things for life. So they started probably early in late childhood or something like that as apprentices, and then moved ahead. But today, I will show you the works of some of our students and advanced students who already became teachers themselves. And what I will be showing you, they learned more or less in 3 years. And then obviously there is no end to perfecting your art. There is another question: in historical iconography, where were the painters required to fast prior to beginning of the icon? I think they formally were, but again, we don't know how strictly they observed this. And certainly, I'm all for prayer and fast, but it does not substitute for the art. So you have to do both. And maybe fast it's certainly important, but probably it's not the most important thing in the process of iconography. Certainly the prayerful spirit is important. And if the fast helps you to keep your spirit focused and focused on the Lord, that's helpful. If not, then it's not helpful. Fast is not the end in itself, for sure. Okay, I'm returning to the presentation, and yeah, it's here. Can you see it now? Can you? Yeah. Okay. Good. So the next thing is just details of iconography, and they are beautiful. If you are looking at the flowers, how they are made, like on the ground of the icon, or some folds of garment, they have really nice feeling to them. Sometimes they can, if you reproduce the part of the icon like that and make it large, it can look like a modern painting on its own, just to decorate your walls. I will just show you more. I would love to show you more of those elements. Just, yeah. And Are you seeing now the kind of blue robe? Okay. No? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is just a segment, a lower segment of the icon showing the edges of the robe and some vegetation here on the background. Yeah, the elements, again, the bright colors and the neck and some elements of the clothing. So just to give you an idea, this icon here, it was originally orange, and most of the dark you are seeing here is dust and dirt. So if you look at the icon today, it looks to you very dark, but it was actually bright orange when it was painted. And you will see in a minute when we recreate old icons anew, they are much brighter than the ancient originals, because we work with the proper natural colors without darkening them on purpose. Yeah, these are just beautiful. Combination of colors and the lines, they are so, I think they end up with a very nice ensemble. This is just an eye, another eye, flowers. Okay. I'll just show you a couple more faces. That's interesting too. You can see the orange background picture, okay? Mary with the child. You can see how the volume is added. It's a flat representation and the ochre layer underneath, but then with gradually building up with the white pigment and with more intensive rose, it's adding a 3D effect to the picture. The face becomes really rounded. I always loved those eyes, not just this particular ones, but the interplay between white and this dot of dark is very energetic. Again, very vivid strokes of white that make the face expressive. And the halo, you can see there is this decoration that is achieved with carving on the halo, on the gesso, and then with different gilding. The gold is applied evenly, and then in some parts it's kind of like scratched. Also, if you notice, the use of colors is very brave. It's very bright. This blue and red and gold and other green, a lot of green in those pictures. They are very interesting. There is a question in the restoration process. Do you use technology to analyze the paint pigment elements that were used to create the paint in the specific colors? Yes, but not we. We don't do restoration. People in the National Museum and some other scholars who have access to the originals directly, they do restoration, and we rely on their work. And they use various modern technologies to identify the pigments. Sometimes they X-ray the icons, or ultraviolet light them, and so on. It depends on the sophistication of technology they have access to. Yeah, just the blessing gesture, the way the hand is painted. Again, working from the dark to more light. Good. Let me return to the presentation. Okay. Okay, with gesso grounding, you can work on that too. You're seeing now a new icon painted 2 years ago by one of our students, and you can see the carving on the gesso grounding that is later covered with gold, and it gives you this nice looking uneven surface that works well with gilding. Sometimes the gesso is not carved into, but there is so-called dropped-on ornament. You have even gesso, sandpapered, and then you take drops of liquid gesso and apply it on the top according to certain patterns, which results into something like this, or like this, or like this. Just the ornament in the gesso that is later covered with silver or gold or just white pigment, and it becomes pretty nice. These are all our new icons. So I just have to explain what we mean by this imitation. Imitation is a way of learning from ancient masters and from their masterpieces. It's like analyzing someone's handwriting and trying to write like him or her. It's not for the sake of forgery. We don't pretend to make old icons. We paint new icons. But while imitating, you are actually improving your hand so that you can work like the ancient masters. Imitation is not copying. Copying would be something like slavish imitation, like without understanding. You are just doing one-to-one. Imitation is penetrating into the art, learning how the art was made, and then how the artwork was made, and then trying to reproduce it with your own abilities. But the emphasis here is on the very faithful learning of the original and very faithful repetition of how it was made. Understanding the nuances of technique and style and working from the lower layer upwards. So it's something like learning dance or language. You imitate, but not to imitate, to parrot someone, but to actually learn from how he is doing, that eventually you can master the language and perhaps write your own poem in that language. So that's the idea. Our students in the initial stages, they imitate something very simple, then something more complicated, then they imitate better and better, and at the end they are free to to make their own compositions and apply and mix freely what they have learned from imitation of 7 different old authors into their own individual style, or into something they want to make in this particular case. So they can draw upon the set of devices they have used from various authors in their own creativity. Here are just some examples. The icon we have just seen in good detail, and that's a new icon that was painted by one of our students. It's imitation, but the task was not to produce a copy, but to use the same pigments and the same style and technique at their own will, how they can do the same thing. So they were actually using as much as possible same pigments, and probably the original icon was much lighter, something like this, when it was created. It's also a very humiliating way to learn, because no matter how hard you try and how long you learn, at the end you still see that your imitation is so far from the original. That means that the original artists were usually either much better trained, had a much longer practice, or they were just genius and they could do things much better so far than any of our students or teachers can do. But as an attempt is not too bad in any case. Here is another comparison of the 15th century icon and the modern icon made just a couple of years ago. Another pair. That's a very famous original icon that is believed to be miraculous from the 16th century. And that's an imitation of this icon by one of the students. Usually these imitations are made in more or less same size. Archangels. So the old, the new, the old face, the new face. That's just learning materials we are using, like illustrating the steps. So the drawing, the initial layer, then adding more layers, working with the halo, with the carving of the halo, and eventually adding the so-called modeling, making the face voluminous with white pigments. Here are the steps of making the icon, well, preparing the board, gluing and so on, then making the drawing. Either you do it independently or you copy on the board, gilding the halo, working with the colors in several layers, modeling, so adding the white volume to the clothing, hair, and face and other body parts, making inscriptions, then frame, edges, and the reverse side. Usually the frame is made with some kind of dark pigment like red or blue, and the back side of the icon is usually also covered with kind of dark red pigment in one layer, just to make it, to cover the natural wood with something to tone it down a little bit. Yeah, just few more samples. So these are just natural pigments, how they use without being mixed with anything else. And then you can add as many mixtures as possible, chemically or aesthetically. Some pigments don't go with one with the other. You cannot mix them because they will turn into something ugly. But in many cases, you can mix pigments, or you can put a pigment on the top of another pigment, and then it results in a certain color, in a certain depth of color, and so on. And here are just examples again of old icons of Saint Elijah, which was dirty and dark. But since we knew what the actual pigment was used, this green one, it was in the original probably like something like that, the pinky pigment. And the glauconite, a green pigment. Yeah, again, Saint Elijah, and in this case it's more blue, the azurite or lazurite pigment used for producing the blue color, and ochre for the ground brown color, and then red on the top of it, and many others. There are pigments that are organic, mineral that come from like clay or various stones, sometimes semi-precious stones, like malachite, something your jewelry can be made of. So they are crushed into powder and then painted with. And sometimes they can be organic, made of roots, plants, or even beetles. Once one of our painters tried a special, she collected like red beetles and had them stay in a jar for some time, and then ground, and it had very impressive red color, extremely rare, extremely specific. Sometimes we redo old icons, like this one was vertical, but for some reason we needed it more square, horizontal. So it's based on this, basically on this old drawing, but turned into something more modern, perhaps. Yeah, similar case. This is an example of Western. We had a patron who wanted this Christ, the pharmacologist. It's an Baroque time, 17th century German Baroque painting, which he wanted made in a like kind of quasi iconographic style. And we worked on it, so we preserved the layout of the Baroque picture, but made it into much more in a quasi iconographic style. So the idea of this image was that Christ is like a producer of medicine for people who suffer from infectious diseases. It was well before the COVID hit, but prophetic. And quite traditionally looking icon of Saint Antonius the Great. This is was an improvisation by one of our artists, Saint Martyr Tatiana, with marginal scenes, but she decided to do it as a triptych, so added these scenes from her life here on those kind of doors, and her in the center. Often we do icons as presents for baptisms or weddings, like these ones. or replicas of very famous images, like the Hilandari Pantocrator I showed you in the presentations. Is a 13th or 14th century Byzantine or Serbian icon, and it's obviously not a copy of it. It's just a kind of variation on the topic of this original icon, adding some new features and trying to work with the traditional pattern. We also work with the glass, so the so-called icon on glass technique. It's icon for the impatient people or people who have no time, because for normal icon on wood, you need 2 weeks or so to paint, to learn painting. But on the glass, it's actually doable into 1 day. And people really love it, at least to try. So we use tempera, so egg tempera technique, but just applied to glass. And there is a whole current in Ukrainian art, which actually comes from German art in 19th century and becomes very popular in Ukraine in late 19th, early 20th century. These very colorful ethnic icons. I think they look to you a little bit like Hispanic art. It comes from Bavaria, actually, from Tyrol in Austria and Bavaria in Germany, and it becomes very popular in Ukraine, and so it's perceived by many people as something traditional, very homey, ethnic, and they like to do it, and it's fast. So, but also for normal iconography, we also gather sometimes nice groups in the summer. We offer programs like a summer school in residence for 2 or 3 weeks, for which you need to come to Ukraine. But also nowadays we offer it in online format with pre-recorded high-quality video, and then tutoring online, working on your personal icon. Some of you had experience of that last time. I think Nadia, if I'm not mistaken, said she was participating. Online groups, tutoring, private tutoring, and history and theology of the icon, like the one I'm teaching for you. Also, we do like short retreat and inspirational programs for various groups, like 1 day painting of an icon, or 1 day reflection with a specific icon or a specific iconographic theme. People love it, and it's a nice, I think it's a nice format for many people. Okay, I don't want to get too much into advertising, but I just wanted to, to really show you what we are doing and how this all is, how this kitchen of iconography is arranged, what's going on there. Yeah, I think we are pretty much out of time. And what I need to say at the end is that I will update the page. So keep in contact with the course page. I will add some useful resources, and I will add the links to all the videos. I will email you once again in this course with kind of updated information about everything. For those of you who want to support my endeavors, I will send a link to a PayPal, and I will put it on the website too. So if you want to do that, it will be there. My Patreon, I mentioned of the Patreon, but it's not working at the moment. I don't know what happened. There is some issue there. So I have a Patreon page. I think I will get it going sooner or later. But for the time being, I can just use the PayPal account if you want to make any donation. If you ever want to commission an icon or come to our course to learn, we will be happy to accommodate you with your wishes. Otherwise, I just really thank you for your active participation. I felt your interest and your appreciation. And if you need my advice or anything, write to me. I will try to respond and try to be helpful as far as I can. And for those of you, the final thing, for those of you who want to get credit for the course, we finished. You heard everything. You can go again through the videos and make the decision what topic is interesting for you, and write to me directly, and I will respond to you with a suggestion regarding your further readings and whatever you need to do to get the credit for this short course. Yeah, so that would be pretty much it from my side. Thank you.
Are you having any in-person, like the retreats or anything with the COVID restrictions, or is everything online at your school right now?
We actually, I hope we will be having this summer. For now, we don't have anything for the foreigners. We do have still classes for Ukrainian students as far as our local regulations allow. But in the summer, I'm very hopeful that we will have the borders open and people are already willing to travel. So we are planning the in-person session for this summer, yes. Which will be probably in July. Usually it's two or three first weeks of July.
And can you send that information to us, like if you have one?
Yes, I will send the precise information to all of you. And we will probably do both this summer. For those who are willing to come, we will do it in person. And for those who want to take online, we will offer a number of online solutions, so both in the summer and during the academic year. So there is always a possibility. If you want to study, we will find a way for you to do so, because even if we have 2 or 3 people, usually we run a short course for them.
And are any of those retreats the one with the glass? I've never done glass, and I would absolutely love to do that. So, or is it just the traditional? Yeah.
Glass, both traditional and glass. Glass is very much doable online. With glass, there is much less nuances you need to know. It's pretty much like coloring a children coloring book, because you have the drawing and then you cover it with tempera. There are, of course, some tricks and so on, but it's far, far less than with full-fledged traditional icon.
Sure. Thank you. That's wonderful. I love that information. So great.
Yeah. I also posted in the resource section, I posted a link to the album of the icons made by various students and teachers of ours. And it's really in good quality, so you can just go through that and see, just if you are curious about the work they were doing. And this is over many years, so you can see.
Is that resource, is that on the website? I'm sorry, I didn't catch where that resource.
On the web page for the course, in the course resource tab.
Okay, thank you.
There is a Flickr album link in which you can see the high resolution images of many icons.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyone else? Good. Then we need to finish, and I will be emailing you tomorrow with what I said, with the update and so on. So all the best. Thank you very much for participating in this course. Also, by the way, if you want to be generous to other groups, please send your good reviews or good feedbacks to the organizers of the course, because I'm teaching and I'm contacting with you all the time and I'm getting this positive feedback from you. But Father Vasil Chepelsky, who was who is mentioned. No, he is not mentioned. I will mention him on the website, who organized this course on the behalf of the Eparchy of Passaic. Just thank them, because they also give your thanks, and that will encourage them to maybe to run this or similar courses in the future again.
Taras, you have been awesome. You have been the best instructor on this type of, on your knowledge of this field. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, thank you so much for all of this. This is wonderful resources, and I look forward to maybe a workshop with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. God bless you.
God bless you too.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Tars.
Thanks.